Before I even start writing absolutely any code, I need to sit here and think about my problem just a little bit. While I can code quickly, there's no point in writing code if you really don't understand the problem you're working towards. And if I want to create a standard game of 5-letter Wordle, I need to think about all of the entities and all of the pieces that I need. So, the best way of thinking about a game of Wordle is to just kind of mentally play through it. What happens? Well, you go to the browser. Now I won't be emulating the browser, but once you go to the browser, you know that the computer has already picked a word. So we know that we have an unknown word. Then, from that word, the player then guesses. So now we have some player input or some guess. From there, from those two inputs, the unknown word and the player guess, we compare them. So we compare the guess against an unknown, and then this guess is interesting because we get 3 different values back based on the letters. We could find out, right, if the letter turns green, that means we guessed the letter in the correct position. So the letter is in the word and correct position. Or if your letter turns yellow in Wordle, we know that it means the letter is in the word, incorrect position. And lastly, if our letter turns neither of those colors and instead remains a dark background, that means the letter is not in the word at all. And so those are kind of the 3 different outputs that you get when you perform this type of comparison. After you do that comparison, you think about the colors, you think about maybe displaying those, right? Once I type something into Wordle, I'll display the results based on what's correct or what's not correct on those comparisons. And then at the very end, right, you check if the user has won. And by simply just thinking through my program, I can try and identify the pieces that I need to recreate and estimate which pieces will be harder, which pieces will be easier, and which pieces are dependent on others. Clearly, this flows in a somewhat linear direction where an unknown word is picked first, and then you have n rounds of guessing, and then you check, you compare the guess against the word, display some results if you want, and then check if the user has won. But I don't need to write my program in that same linear fashion necessarily. I can simply really mock these up, right? I don't need actual unknown word or an actual input or player guess to write this core piece here. And that's what I'm going to start with. I think this might be the trickiest part. It might be the easiest part, but I think this is the most integral part to Wordle. And so let's start here with the game's kind of comparison engine. And so if I were to mock this up, I obviously need those 2 dependencies that come before it, but I don't need to load in 500 5-letter words and then have some fancy way of getting user input. I can simply define those just ahead of time, and I can say that my unknown word is hello and that my guess, right, is world. 2 classic programming terms. And in order to compare these 2 phrases or these 2 words, strings, I will need to zip them together. And so I can iterate over them, zip together to access each letter. So I will say for unknown letter, guessed letter, right? And one of the core pieces of rapidly prototyping is making sure that you print everything out every step of the way. Once you print something out, you verify that it works, you've locked it in, and now you're able to move on to the next step. And so you can see here that I've actually tied together these 2 letters, and since we're iterating over them at the same time, we can just straight compare them according to these rules above. And so what I could do here, I could say if the unknown letter is equal to the guessed letter, I'll save that. Let me write out all my branches here first. If the if the guessed letter is in, right, my unknown word, and this is different because it's not a strict letter comparison. And then my catch-all else will be, right, this is not a letter that's in the word. So pretty much the inverse of this. And so we have this kind of branching logic here, but what do we do with all of this? I can either insert some prints in here and make it display something, but I don't want to display anything just yet. That's not the point of writing this engine. Instead, I'll probably assign some temporary variable that represents the status. And since this is three-way logic, this is not just a simple Boolean, right? I can't represent it with just true or false. I need 3 values to represent all of these possibilities. And I'll use something, I guess I could just use integers for now. Might change that up later. I'm not too keen on it, but since we're just rapidly creating something, I want something that works and something that will print out for me. And if I want to check this, I can print out the guessed letter as well as its status. Once I write status correctly, right? And we see that the W was not in the guessed, it was not in the unknown word. O was in the unknown word, but it was not in the correct position. R was not in the unknown word. L, which got 1, was in the unknown word and was in the correct position. And then D was not in the unknown word. And we have this kind of logic that will let us actually play the game of Wordle in, like 8 lines of code. And so this type of problem, this prototyping Wordle, is not too hard when it comes to just the core engine. Let's go ahead and let's think about our words, right? How do we load in a bunch of 5-letter words? And so when we do this, we typically, all of our computers actually have a dictionary of words that we can access. I have just simply copied my computer's dictionary into my local directory, and I've named it words, very aptly named. And what we can do here is let's go ahead and just inspect what's in here. So I can just read the first line of this file, print it out. Okay, I see I'm up against the letter A, capital letter A. And the reason I'm peeking at what's in this file is because essentially, if this is an entire dictionary of words, I know I'm going to have to perform some type of filtering operations. I need to get down to just the words that Wordle will actually use, which in this case will be 5-letter American English words. And so I'll need to perform some filtering operations. And one of the ways I could do this, I can iterate over each line in my file, right? And I can print them out. And all of a sudden, just by running this, I mean, that was, like 2 seconds of time that it took, and I'm also never going to inspect all of these words. Even if I open them up, right, I can see there's a bunch of capitalizations, a bunch of non-letters in my words. And so one of the things that I'll want to do is, if you had to imagine that this dictionary, was hundreds of thousands of lines long, I'm never going to manually check over all of them. Instead, we can use a little bit of itertools magic to simply iterate over the first chunk of our file. And what this lets us do is just focus on a small subset of our data instead of having to look at all of it. And so now I'm just looking at the first 10 words, which is much more maintainable or much easier to look at than iterating through the entire file and looking at all of them. And so from here, I can write some filtering operations, and I can say my valid words will have a length of 5. So length of 5. And let's go ahead and see what happens when we print that out. Length word equals, I didn't define my word. Word is the line stripped. Because when you're working with text files, you have all these new lines at the end, and I don't want any white space. So it seems within the first 10 lines in my file, we actually don't get any 5-letter words, so let's bump this up to 50. Okay, now we get some words back. We get capital A, Aaron. Okay, so that looks like a name. So something else I'll want to check is the word lowercase. And you can use the .lower method to check that. And it looks like we're getting some pretty good words. And as I iterate, I want to increase how much of this file I'm consuming such that I have the chance to essentially run more tests and catch with my eyes where these tests won't work. And so if you see here the actual last word that I have printed out as a base with an accent aigu above the E. And so we want to make sure we don't have any diacritics because those typically aren't used in your standard game of Wordle. So a way I can filter that out, I could check if each letter is in the ASCII alphabet, or I could just ask the word if it's 1 alpha, right? I don't want any numbers in here, just on the off chance, but I can also check if it is ASCII, all ASCII text. And so now when I do this and I print out my list, I see I'm getting 5-letter words, and we can go ahead and increase this to 150. Okay, it's still looking good. Let's try just going through the whole thing. And you can see our filtering looks like it's worked pretty well. What I like to do with these long chains of filters, right, all these ands, if these were computationally expensive operations and I really wanted to check the cheapest one first, right, because I would want to fail fast in that case. But since they're all relatively cheap, I actually like to put all of these conditions into a larger list. So I'll go ahead and I'll just grab all these. Oops. Go ahead and grab all those and I'll throw them into a list, and I will essentially check if all of those conditions are true. And so grab all these, paste them down here, and what I'll do here is I'll just simply throw them in the list and separate them with a comma. And what this lets me do is easily add and take away any conditions in case something isn't panning out the way I expect it. I can simply comment it out, or I can choose to keep it in, or even better, I can add more conditions. And so you see when I do this, we end here. We got to get rid of this extra parentheses and add in a colon. And we get the same output that I had before, except now I have the ability, right, I can comment these out if I wanted to and see if I still get valid words, or if I had other conditions to add in, I can do that as well. And so we have a solid word here, but we need to pull them out into some other structure. And since I am not really certain where I'll go with this structure, right, I have a few choices, right? I could use anything that's mutable, so I could use a list, I could use a set, I could use a dictionary, but I really don't see the point in the dictionary at this point. I know all of these words are unique, and I'm not sure how much comparison checking I'm going to do. So I'll go ahead and I'll start off with the list, because the list is a great kind of grab bag, catch-all structuring mechanism in Python. And if I need to convert it to a set, right, that's easy enough. I swap out the append for an add, and I swap out the word list for a set. So let's go ahead and print our word list. And great. So it looks like we have all of the words that we need. Those Roman numerals probably won't be words. I could filter them out by hand. But since I'm not certain how many there will be, we can ignore that for now and just make a comment to ourselves. Right. So I could do something, let's see if set, right, if all the letters in the word is equal to X, V, I, and then I'll want to negate this. And so there, X, I, X, is subset. Forgot my dot. Okay, and now we've actually filtered out most of those, X, C, V, I. Hopefully there's no word that this is accidentally pulling out, but that's why I like to keep all of these filters in this list, because if I find out this is not doing something that I want it to, I can really easily just go back, comment it out, and I picked up where I left off from. All right, but we have our word list here, and so we can move on to the next portion of our game of Wordle. And so we've figured out kind of the game engine, we've figured out the word list. Let's go back up to our layout here. We can figure out the unknown word. We just did that. Now we're on the display. So let's go ahead and code up the display. Typically when you're playing Wordle, as I mentioned, you get 3 colors depending on the status of your guess. And those will be colored uniquely per letter. But what we can do in Python, if we want to add color to our terminal, We could reach for a tool like Colorama, if you've ever worked with that for adding color to your terminal programs, or we could know a little bit about how the terminal works, and we could understand that even Colorama works through something called ANSI escape codes. And so in Python, or in any terminal, any program that displays to the terminal, you can actually use some special characters to set both the foreground color and the background color of any given string of bytes. So this starts with a \033 notifying your terminal that whatever comes after this is going to be potentially colored, and it's going to follow the upcoming patterns. What I do now, I open a square bracket and I can start inputting numbers. These numbers will indicate the background and or foreground color of the string that I want to print, and I separate them by a colon. So 40 here is actually the shorthand for saying I want the background to be black, and then you need a 1M to indicate that we're done feeding in the pattern, the color pattern, and we can insert some text here. Then you have to start a new pattern and say this is an empty pattern, and this is just telling your shell that anything after this will not be colored, right? So we want our colors to go back to normal kind of terminal color after we print. You can see once I print this, we get some nicely backgrounded text, right, in all caps, and it's black. It is a little hard to see, so I'll add in one more character here. That's 97, and that sets my foreground, my font, or my foreground, to white, so we get a nice strong contrast. And in fact, we can repeat this operation a couple times, swapping out our text for the appropriate values. 42 is green, and 43 is yellow. And so there we have all of our Wordle colors that we'll need. And I'll go ahead and I can assign these to variables or anything that I need, and I can show you a little bit about how I'm at least planning on using these. So this was dark, this was green, and this was yellow. And so now that I have these, I can go ahead and what I want to do, right, I want to actually color, apply some coloring to something inside of these. So within Python, I can just insert a formatted string, right? So we'll go ahead and delete that, leave an empty placeholder, leave an empty placeholder, and then now I can simply say dark.format. I need to print it. And there we get a nice dark background on my word hello. And you can treat these just as any Python object. I could put word equals hello, and then I can iterate over all my colors. And I can format my word with that color, in that color. And that's pretty much how I'll be using it throughout this program. And so let's see here. So for coloring that, print color.format. Looks good. Okay. So what we need here is, instead of coloring entire words, I want to color individual letters. So I can just really quickly mock up what that would look like. Instead of printing each word, I can actually reach into, let's see, I'll do this, yeah. I will cycle along the colors, right? And I will extract each letter from the word. And I'll zip them, and because zip will short circuit, it'll actually be the termination sign for a cycle. So letters, comma, color, and zip, word, let's see, word, and then I will grab dark, green, yellow. And I need that. There we go. Okay, and then now I can simply print color.format like that. Okay, and we get the first three letters of that. And if I cycle on this, we should get the remaining, yes, we get the entire word, and we stop at the end of our word. Now this display is vertical, right? Typically when we spell things, we go from left to right, at least in English. So I can have just some type of row or display buffer, and then I can write into that buffer. And you can think, right, this does not have to be a list. This could be a file descriptor. It could be a string IO buffer in Python if I don't want to open an actual file on my operating system. And we could write into this and separate things by new lines or separate things by spaces. But I'll just use a row just to be for convenience in this case. And I'll join that row, and then I print everything out, and I get each of my letters colored as you would kind of expect to see in a game of Wordle. So now with my display done, and my word selection done, and my kind of core logic done, I think we are ready to put everything together and make a very basic game of Wordle.